A massive development just blew the Nancy Guthrie missing person investigation wide open. Over the last 6 weeks, countless true crime channels have launched their coverage from the exact same chilling timestamp of 1:47 in the morning. Right as the security feed cuts out, a mysterious figure steps onto the deck, spends 41 uninterrupted minutes indoors, and leaves behind nothing but crimson stains on the front stairs. Her heart monitor dropped offline at 2:28, right before a sketchy ride rolled into frame at 2:36, creating an obsessed-over timeline the internet simply refuses to drop. Strangely enough, even with millions of eyes on the case, authorities haven't handcuffed a single suspect, largely because the real mystery kicks off much earlier. We need to rewind the clock 4 solid hours to January 31st at 9:50 at night, right when a motorized garage bay shut out in the Catalina foothills. Only one individual insists he knows exactly what transpired behind those walls, and federal agents have already knocked on his door over 5 separate times. Tommaso Cayenne maintains that he personally dropped the elderly woman off following an evening meal at his own residence. His official story paints a picture of him watching her step safely inside, waiting until the automated bay firmly sealed her indoors. The glaring issue here is that the electronic log showing the system securing itself at 9:50 is the sole piece of objective evidence putting her at the property. Not a single surveillance lens caught her crossing the threshold, nor did any locals witness the purported drop-off happen. Every other detail relies entirely on the word of the final guy to allegedly see her breathing, which brings us to the glaring issue of her prescriptions. The elderly woman had a strict regimen requiring vital cardiac pills right around 10 at night. Assuming she walked in between 9:45 and 9:50, she had roughly 5 to 15 minutes to swallow them. Yet detectives discovered those exact tablets completely undisturbed on her countertop the following morning. Keep in mind, this was an 84-year-old patient who relied heavily on an artificial pulse generator. Local law enforcement made it incredibly clear that skipping those meds for even 24 hours would be a guaranteed death sentence for her. Are we really supposed to believe she strolled right past her life-saving routine without taking a single sip of water? Even if temporary memory lapses do occasionally strike the elderly, detectives previously praised her razor-sharp cognitive state, making this bizarre oversight a massive red flag in the investigation. There is absolutely a chance she just crashed out from sheer exhaustion the moment she got inside. Should that prove true, it essentially means she randomly abandoned a vital health habit on the exact same night tragedy struck. An entirely different theory suggests someone or something stopped her dead in her tracks before she hit the kitchen, assuming she even made it indoors to begin with. We know her auditory devices were taken out, leaving her completely deaf to the world around her. While her smartphone sat idly on the bedside table, her purse had been tossed inside. Her personal vehicle sat undisturbed in its bay, and virtually every piece of property she owned remained perfectly in place. Every single thing was accounted for except the homeowner herself. Web sleuths have burned 6 full weeks obsessing over the shadowy figure caught on the veranda, totally ignoring an entirely different, arguably more critical puzzle. What exactly went down from 9:50 that evening until 1:47 in the morning? Because nobody has properly unpacked that 4-hour void. Nor have detectives transparently addressed it. Things take an incredibly dark turn once you analyze what investigators ultimately pulled from Tommaso Cayenne's ride after holding it hostage for 40 long days. When sitting down to review that impound log, the previously established chain of events begins to look extremely suspicious. Authorities scoured the automobile deep in the wasteland beyond Tucson, reportedly discovering a set of size 12 female trousers alongside a dark coat, add in the sketchy ties linking members of Tommaso's band scene straight to the individual firing off extortion texts. And the plot thickens considerably. The ultimate smoking gun here is that those demands bypassed both Savannah and federal agents entirely, landing squarely on Tommaso's personal device instead. Stacking all these bizarre coincidences together transforms that blank block of time from a simple oversight into the absolute linchpin of the whole mystery. This marks the exact spot where we venture into territory most commentators actively avoid, far away from that notorious front step. We are skipping past the bizarre backwards walker on the security feed and ignoring the police chief's endless stream of botched press conferences. Instead, we are shining a massive spotlight on those 4 precursor hours, which will completely shatter whatever theories you held before hitting play on this breakdown. Routine was absolutely everything to her right before her head hit the pillow. The elderly woman always popped out her heavy-duty audio amplifiers, plunging her into an impenetrable silence where normal sounds simply ceased to exist. At 84, she relied on high-tech biology, wearing an implanted defibrillator that seamlessly tracked data via her Apple gadgets throughout the night. Clocking in around 150 pounds, she maintained a rigid twice-daily pharmacy habit to keep severe cardiovascular disease at bay, completely stripped of her senses. She routinely drifted off into solitary slumber, inside her isolated home scattered amidst the Arizona Badlands. This fiercely resilient matriarch single-handedly guided 3 kids to adulthood after a catastrophic Mexican excavation accident claimed her husband Charles back in 1988. Plunged into sudden widowhood at 46, she immediately stepped up to play both parenting roles without a single complaint. Retired federal investigator Maureen O'Connell, who suffered a similar parental loss around Savannah's age, frequently painted characters of her generation as remarkably self-reliant warriors. These stubborn souls would rather fight tooth and nail than surrender to a nursing facility, demanding to age comfortably under their own roofs regardless of outside opinions. The missing matriarch embodied that exact brand of unwavering, old-school grit. The terrifying truth about Twilight for an older woman living alone is the suffocating, which is precisely why she avoided driving after sundown despite having perfect night vision. Daylight hours never restricted her mobility in the slightest. Yet once evening fell, she depended entirely on relatives or rideshare apps, a routine carrying a hidden risk. Every single driver discovered her exact home address. They could easily see her advanced age and vulnerability. They noticed she walked inside without any companions in the dead of night, and they might have even realized the security lens mounted outside her isolated desert property was nothing more than a dummy device. Wealth and prestige ran deep in her bloodline, considering her daughter Savannah pulls in roughly $8 million annually in Manhattan, while her son Cameron built a formidable military career as a retired Air Force colonel who used to pilot F-16 fighter jets. Then there was her other daughter, Annie, who resided a mere 4 miles down the road alongside her husband, Tommaso. On paper, Nancy enjoyed a massive safety net of affluent relatives and endless financial support behind closed doors. However, she lacked a residential nurse. She wore no life-saving alert necklace. She possessed no panic switch, and that fancy Nest lens out front lacked the paid subscription required to capture video. Sure, the digital eye bolted to Nancy's exterior walls registered movement, yet absolutely zero data ever uploaded to the server. For all intents and purposes, the gadget served as a pointless plastic ornament rather than a protective measure, a fatal flaw that any frequent visitor would undoubtedly recognize. When the night of January 31st rolled around, the elderly widow hopped into a rideshare vehicle bound for the residence shared by Annie and Tommaso. Official logs from the Pima County Sheriff indicate she pulled up at 5:32 in the evening, kicking off a mundane family gathering filled with supper, board games, and a single margarita, which Savannah famously quipped during a live broadcast that her petite mother needed to pace herself when consuming alcohol. Nothing felt out of place that Friday, and once the clock struck 9:48 at night, Tommaso chauffeured his mother-in-law back to her desert oasis, a quick drive lasting barely 10 minutes. Her automatic garage shut completely by 9:50 at night, and Tommaso swore he waited to confirm she crossed the threshold safely before peeling out. Immediately following that drop-off, he navigated the 4 miles back to his own driveway, and shockingly, 14 agonizing hours ticked by without a single soul reaching out to Nancy. Not a solitary phone ring, nor a text notification. Nobody bothered making that brief drive to monitor an 84-year-old cardiac patient who routinely removed her hearing devices at bedtime, plunging herself into total silence within a vulnerable home unguarded by working cameras. Her eventual disappearance did not trigger police involvement because of some gut-wrenching premonition from loved ones. The authorities were only alerted after she blew off a morning meetup at a neighbor's place for a virtual church broadcast. So roughly around 11 in the morning, Panicked relatives finally swarmed the property to investigate, scouring every room and sweeping the yard, only to find absolutely zero traces of the matriarch. They ultimately dialed 911 at midday, but tragically, by the time dispatch picked up, the horrific fate that befell Nancy Guthrie had already concluded 9 hours prior. Grasping the true sinister nature of this mystery requires looking past the headlines, demanding a deep dive into the raw forensic data rather than the regurgitated cable news soundbites or the heavily sanitized police press briefings. Because at exactly 1:47 in the morning, a shadowy intruder manually deactivated the front porch camera, reaching a gloved hand straight up to tamper with the hardware. Thanks to a backdoor collaboration with Google, federal agents managed to salvage corrupted fragments of digital memory, unearthing chilling frames that theoretically vanished forever since her system lacked a paid cloud storage tier. Those salvaged pixels revealed a lurking silhouette claiming the entryway, navigating the dark steps with the swagger of an insider who knew the layout perfectly. There was no fumbling around in the dark. This prowler marched straight toward the electronic eye with chilling precision, fully aware of its exact placement. Criminal profilers classify this specific type of arrogant body language as definitive ownership behavior. Right before killing the feed, the Phantom strikes the glass lens twice in a frighteningly casual manner, treating the sabotage with the same indifference as flicking off a bedroom lamp. The suspect arrived dressed for violence in dark nitrile hand protection and a heavy balaclava, though a distinct patch of facial hair, likely a goatee or mustache, poked through the fabric. Slung over his shoulders sat a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiking bag sourced from Walmart, given away by its signature glowing safety stripes. He also rocked what looked like an elastic abdominal holster, even if the weapon itself dangled at a wildly amateurish angle. Stuffed inside his front pocket sat a mystery device boasting a long antenna, which definitely ruled out a standard cellular phone. Federal authorities pegged the intruder's stature somewhere between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches, possessing a remarkably unremarkable physique. Veteran psychological profiler Jim Clemente pointed out a faint skin discoloration or ink piece stamped across the suspect's right wrist, which flashed into view for a split second when the rubber cuff slipped down, while the sheer horror that unfolded during the subsequent 41 minutes remains shrouded in complete police secrecy. Since the digital watcher was legally blind by that point, detectives had to piece the nightmare together from gruesome crimson stains, painting the entryway and trailing down the concrete driveway. Forensics logged the splatter as perfectly circular pools with unbroken edges, a specific geometry that ex-federal agent O'Connell claims only happens when bodily fluids drip vertically from a stationary altitude. Evaluating the terrifying scene, she deduced those macabre puddles proved the victim was hauled away like cargo instead of fleeing on her own 2 feet. Not a single bloody shoe print broke up the trail, completely lacking any scuffs or dragging lines, leading investigators to a single sickening conclusion. The attacker bundled Nancy up tightly in unknown material, hauled her limp body straight out the heavy oak entrance, marched right past the wrought iron fencing, and shoved her inside a waiting getaway car. Considering she tipped the scales at a manageable 150 pounds, dragging that kind of heavy load alone is a brutal, agonizingly slow ordeal for any single perpetrator. Back inside the residence, her nightly pills sat completely undisturbed on the kitchen island. Every single one of Nancy's prescribed doses for both morning and night remained exactly as they were. Her smartphone lay perfectly still on the bedside table, right next to her abandoned wallet, in a home that showed absolute zero signs of a forced entry. Not a single valuable was pocketed, meaning the intruder came strictly to take Nancy. The timeline shifted at exactly 2:28 in the morning. At that exact minute, the vital wireless link between her chest pacemaker and her mobile device permanently severed. That terrifying drop-off was the absolute final digital heartbeat Nancy Guthrie ever transmitted into the world. Exactly 41 agonizing minutes ticked by between the intentional blinding of the security lens and the failure of her medical device. For 41 minutes, an intruder lingered inside those walls without displaying a single ounce of panic or haste. The perpetrator glided through the hallways with chilling intimacy. They navigated the pitch-black rooms like a homeowner, grabbing a late-night glass of water, expertly dodging every noisy floorboard with ghostly precision. However, The terrifying events of February 1st likely originated far before that fateful evening, 9 days prior. On January 23rd, a profoundly disturbing piece of surveillance footage surfaced on a local neighborhood watch application. The clip revealed a mysterious figure strolling in reverse up a private driveway in the Catalina foothills, roughly 6.5 miles away from Nancy's property. This was clearly not the erratic staggering of an intoxicated person. His reverse strides were incredibly calculated, keeping his spine completely squared to the lens while hiding his face. Keep in mind that standard home surveillance systems rarely film on a constant loop. They actually depend on thermal and motion triggers to wake up. The moment a human crosses that invisible threshold, the device scrambles to catch up. The internal chips power on, the focus calibrates, and the wireless network urgently pings the cloud servers. This entire wake-up sequence requires 1 to 2 full seconds. A typical forward-facing intruder easily exposes their identity during that brief boot-up window, yet an invader approaching in reverse guarantees the lens only catches a useless glimpse of their hooded jacket. Once the recording actually stabilizes, the culprit's identity remains completely obscured. That January creeper was undeniably weaponizing this specific technological blind spot, manipulating his physical gait to outsmart the software. Such calculated maneuvers strip away any illusion of spontaneity. This was a masterclass in premeditation. His test target also sat nestled within the Catalina foothills, a region notorious for its secluded, sprawling desert estates. Those properties boast massive unlit driveways and strict light pollution laws that plunge the entire community into pitch blackness after sundown. That particular driveway sat 6.5 miles from Nancy's porch. It offered the perfect geographical buffer to evade police heat while replicating her exact living conditions. This undeniably resembled a full dress rehearsal rather than some aimless nighttime stroll. Even when a neighborhood hound started aggressively barking, the sprinting suspect maintained his bizarre reverse trajectory. He fought every human urge to glance over his shoulder at the threat. The phantom clearly preferred tumbling onto the asphalt over surrendering a single digital pixel of his facial features. Such ironclad discipline points to endless mental conditioning, proving he visualized the scenario until his reactions turned purely mechanical. Furthermore, the knapsack he sported during that dry run perfectly matched the gear spotted at Nancy's residence 9 days afterward. It was a 25-liter Ozark Trail rucksack from Walmart, easily identified by those glowing high-visibility patches. This exact piece of luggage linked both crime scenes. Yet analyzing the twin sightings exposes a chilling psychological shift. During the January 23rd test, the prowler looks visibly on edge, slouching in deep paranoia as he nervously monitors the environment. By February 1st, that same phantom swaggers onto Nancy's stoop with terrifying arrogance, audaciously smacking the lens twice before killing the feed. The behavioral evolution is absolutely jarring. His former self clearly feared the surveillance gear. The evolved predator felt untouchable, likely because his trial run 9 days earlier triggered zero police response. That successful escape taught him a dangerous lesson. He figured out he was virtually a ghost. When February 1st finally rolled around, the experimental phase had officially concluded. The predator was now out for blood. Detectives eventually flagged January 11th as another critical timeline marker, hitting exactly 21 days prior to the kidnapping. Local authorities pleaded with citizens to scrub their personal doorbell archives for any activity between 9 o'clock and midnight of that specific evening. Yet, police brass completely dodged, explaining the significance of that night. We are now looking at a terrifying triad of dates: January 11th, January 23rd, and February 1st. Stalking, practicing, striking. In the background, journalistic heavyweights including A, B, C, CBS, S, A, N, B, C, and CNN began breaking massive updates. Relying on anonymous police leaks, reporters alleged the phantom stalked Nancy's actual acreage on multiple occasions before the ultimate ambush. One piece of FBI evidence captures the shadowy figure traveling extremely light. A subsequent clip catches him strapped with the infamous rucksack. While his wardrobe remained shockingly consistent, His varying inventory load strongly indicates entirely separate scouting missions. The Pima County authorities immediately rushed to the podium, blasting these broadcasted leaks as wild guesswork. This massive clash of narratives left major broadcasters and federal whispers on one side of the ring, while the local sheriff played a solitary game of defense. Then you have to factor in the surrounding community's surveillance grid, which elevates this psychopath's calculated obsession to a genuinely horrifying level. Imagine federal agents knocking on your front door out of nowhere, grilling you with one incredibly specific question on the 6th of March. They wanted to know if anyone's internet mysteriously dropped on the night of the 1st of February. And plenty of locals confirmed that it absolutely did. A guy living right next door checked his security footage overlooking the victim's property, only to find a glaring blind spot from that exact evening. Though strangely, his whole system wasn't down. The blackout isolated a very tight window of time, killing the video feed exclusively on the lenses pointed straight at the crime scene. Meanwhile, the surveillance equipment guarding the opposite end of his property stayed fully online, sharing the exact same internet connection, running on identical network hardware and power sources without dropping a single frame, which totally rules out your average broadband failure. This points straight to a highly calculated digital attack, intentionally blinding hardware oriented toward a precise location. Hearing about signal jammers usually brings to mind heavy equipment that kills every connection in a massive radius. Yet the facts here tell a completely different story. The victim's own smart doorbell actually managed to grab a few final snapshots before somebody smashed it to pieces, while her implanted medical device stayed perfectly synced until 2:28 in the morning, proving a broad-spectrum attack wasn't utilized. Former federal investigator Jennifer Kofundifer brought up a brilliant alternative theory, suggesting the suspect deployed a network deauthenticator. Rather than dropping a total blackout blanket, this gadget exploits network protocols to surgically kick chosen electronics right off their hubs. Operating with surgical precision, this tech can knock out half a property's surveillance grid, while the rest keeps rolling without a hitch. You can grab one of these gadgets for less than $30. And they are tiny enough to conceal right inside your jacket. Everything the surrounding community witnessed perfectly mirrors the exact symptoms of this localized hacking method. Another local mentioned his hound frantically jolted him awake during the precise time frame his video feeds glitched out. A highly unusual occurrence. Once released into the yard, the canine locked its focus dead on the victim's residence, prompting retired 29-year sheriff veteran Eric Maldonado to note how animals detect high-frequency emissions. That pet was likely barking at an ultrasonic electronic pulse completely invisible to human senses right as the local video feeds went blind. An expansive, empty wasteland sits directly behind both properties, linking the victim's backyard to the witness's land. Sneaking in through that desolate rear boundary would completely hide any getaway cars from neighborhood street traffic, putting the intruder in optimal range to fry the neighboring lenses using a handheld jammer while quietly creeping past the fence line. Sometime after the incident unfolded, aerial media crews captured shattered security bulbs littering the rear patio, confirming the intruder manually busted the street-facing lens before destroying the backyard illumination. Sabotaging a pair of totally separate access points requires serious hustle, meaning a solo operator could technically pull it off. Though former Vegas lawman Randy Sutton strongly believes simultaneous vandalism practically guarantees a multi-person hit squad. Exactly 8 minutes after the victim's heart monitor dropped off the grid, an independent lens, situated roughly 2.5 miles down Camino Real, caught a mysterious car speeding by at 2:36 in the morning. Network reporter Liz Kreutz personally tested the escape path from the crime scene, clocking the drive at 6 minutes flat after the medical device failed at 2:28. Adding a 6-minute transit time puts the suspect at the intersection by 2:34. Yet the tape places them there at 2:36. Those missing 2 minutes fit perfectly with a killer idling at a stop sign, scanning for witnesses before vanishing into the shadows. Local authorities eventually verified that this chronological breakdown made complete logical sense. The wildest detail is that the cops didn't even own the surveillance equipment that cracked the timeline open. A random family living well past the barricaded investigation zone actually possessed the crucial evidence. Detectives completely ignored them early on, forcing these vigilant locals to comb through their own archives and hand-deliver the smoking gun. While those logistics build the physical trail of the night, a tangled mess of personal connections paints a much darker picture behind the scenes. Tommaso Cayenne spent nearly 20 years heavily embedded in the Tucson underground circuit, fronting a post-punk shoegaze outfit called Early Black that gigged all over town. Back in 2007, he linked up with a percussionist named Dominic Evans after answering an old-school classified listing, launching a lifelong collaborative partnership that spawned a debut record chillingly titled Life, Love, Murder. These guys tore up dive bars all over the map, leaving their mark on legendary alternative hubs like the Flycatcher. Things took a bizarre turn in February 2026 when cops nabbed Derek Calla for shooting a deeply suspicious text straight to the couple's personal numbers. His cryptic text bluntly demanded to know if they received the Bitcoin, claiming his crew was standing by for the transaction. He even dialed them up for a split second, though detectives quickly realized the whole stunt was a total scam and slapped the guy with hardcore fraud charges. Law enforcement essentially wrote off the bizarre digital ransom demand as an opportunistic grift completely unrelated to the actual abduction. The catch is that this scammer didn't just pull those private digits out of thin air. He actually shared the stage in that exact same tight-knit sonic community for years. Playing gigs under the terrifying moniker Secret Mutilator, paper trails prove this guy rubbed elbows with the exact same musicians and clubgoers who regularly orbit the band Early Black down in Tucson. The underground music scene is basically a tiny fishbowl holding maybe 200 to 300 regulars tops. When a crowd is that microscopic, everybody inevitably knows everybody else's business, meaning the creep who texted that ransom demand to Tommaso wasn't some random out-of-towner. We are talking about a local insider who ran in the exact same cliques and already had Tommaso's personal phone number saved. Now, that definitely doesn't automatically pin the actual abduction on Derek Calla. Detectives quickly wrote off his message as a sick joke, yet it leaves a massive, lingering question hanging over the case: just how many of Tommaso's buddies knew the intimate details of Nancy's life? Think about who knew her home address, her daily habits, and the glaring fact that she lived entirely by herself. Add to that the obvious reality of her daughter being a famous public figure, because gossip spreads like wildfire in these close-knit groups. Folks constantly run their mouths while hanging out backstage, grabbing drinks at gigs, or chilling at house parties. Crucial tidbits slip out during casual banter, usually without the speaker ever realizing they just dropped a massive bombshell. Just imagine if a shady character in that scene figured out this musician's mother-in-law was an 84-year-old widow staying alone out in the Catalina foothills. Finding out she lived in a house with a broken security gate and dummy cameras would be absolute gold for a predator. This brings us straight to the car, which is the exact focal point where the timeline finally crashes into the hard forensic evidence. Right out of the gate, police impounded a blue Honda CR-V that Tommaso and Annie drove. Fast forward to March 11th, and after more than 40 grueling days, the couple still hadn't gotten their ride back. It sat rotting at a garage, getting pieced back together after investigative journalist Dave Mack reported it had been thoroughly gutted for clues. The Puma County Sheriff's Department casually mentioned to Parade magazine that they were starting the return process. Yet they conveniently left out an actual timeline. Holding onto a car for 40 days seems incredibly excessive when the sheriff publicly swore these two weren't even suspects. Crime expert Jennifer Coffindaffer offered up a solid theory about this mysterious delay. She believes there are several critical reasons why cops are clinging to that particular set of wheels. Detectives are likely trying to figure out if someone tailed Nancy after she drove away from Annie and Tommaso's place on January 31st. They could be desperately hunting for a hidden GPS tracker, rogue fingerprints, or stray DNA left by whoever tampered with the exterior. That vehicle is literally the final secure bubble Nancy sat inside before pulling into her driveway on that fateful evening. Police are heavily relying on whatever biological material she shed inside the cabin, like stray hairs or microscopic skin cells. Crime lab techs will compare those interior fibers to clues found on her porch. Praying, they find a matching third-party DNA profile at both crime scenes. Discovering an outsider's genetic material inside that passenger cabin would be an absolute game changer. it would undeniably link an attacker to the very last trip Nancy ever made. A legal nuance that retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer strongly emphasized. Every single sweep of Annie and Tommaso's property was done completely voluntarily, meaning they willingly opened their doors. Detectives never bothered getting a probable cause warrant, which heavily implies the police still lack the hard proof needed to officially name them as targets. However, inviting the police inside voluntarily opens up a whole different can of worms. It proves the couple actively permitted cops to tear their car apart, raid their house multiple times, and rip security cameras straight off the walls. They even stood by while authorities pumped their septic tank and hauled out packed suitcases during marathon midnight photography sessions. Total transparency usually comes from folks who genuinely have zero skeletons in their closets. On the flip side, a completely guilty mastermind, confident in their cover-up, might play along just as eagerly. Playing nice with the cops hardly clears your name, because both harmless victims and calculated killers know exactly how to play that game. Nancy's personal car was heavily towed straight out of her own garage, though the cops have kept their mouths completely shut about it since. That brings us to the unforgiving desert wasteland circling Tucson, where search parties just stumbled onto a chilling new lead. Rogue civilian searchers scouring the brush claim they dug up discarded clothes, specifically a black jacket alongside a pair of size 12 women's trousers. Grainy snapshots of this unverified evidence immediately went viral across all the major social media platforms. Law enforcement absolutely refuses to connect this wardrobe find to Nancy vanishing, leaving the entire discovery in a frustrating state of limbo. Regardless, when a woman gets swallowed up by the midnight shadows and is never seen again, every clue matters. Finding random garments dumped right in the primary search grid is definitely not something any seasoned detective is going to blindly ignore. Former Puma County Deputy Eric Maldonado knows these affluent streets better than anyone after working local burglaries for 29 straight years. He flat out stated that criminals out here love to use the deep desert as a massive, unforgiving dumping ground for human remains. They will toss victims into scorching burn pits or bury them in nowhere lands where a body stays hidden forever unless you possess the exact coordinates, swallowing entire cities in its vast emptiness. The Sonoran Desert turns any manhunt into an impossible nightmare. Experts studying historical kidnapping trends suggest that if the victim perished out there, her body likely rests somewhere between 2 and 5 miles from her front door. This grim reality sparked a few plausible scenarios grounded in hard facts, completely bypassing the usual web-based gossip. The leading hypothesis points directly at someone within her inner circle, specifically Tommaso Cayenne, the final individual officially spotted with her before she vanished. After dropping her off and parting ways near the carport, he headed straight back to the residence he occupies alongside Annie, roughly 4 miles down the road. Crucially, absolutely zero external proof exists to back up his whereabouts during the critical window, stretching from 10 at night until 1:47 in the morning. Since Annie stayed at the exact same property, the two could easily corroborate whatever narrative either of them chose to feed investigators. Having visited the victim for 20 years, Tommaso intimately understood her property layout, including the precise blind spots of her local-only security cameras. He undoubtedly witnessed her using the smart home application on multiple occasions. Fully realizing she had completely opted out of the premium cloud storage plan, the entry barrier posed no mystery to him whatsoever, especially since he had smoothly navigated it just a few hours prior to the incident. Furthermore, he was keenly aware of her nightly routine of taking out her earpieces, leaving her utterly deaf to the world past 10 o'clock. Her strict pharmaceutical regimen was also no secret, guaranteeing she would be taking her nighttime pills merely moments after he departed the driveway. 2 straight decades of weekly meals gave him the ultimate advantage, the ability to navigate every hallway and room pitch black without making a single sound. In his day job, Tommaso educates high schoolers in elite biological sciences, covering everything from genetic sequencing to complex crime scene investigation tactics. His curriculum revolves around sophisticated laboratory procedures like polymerase chain reactions and gel analysis, which happen to be the exact same tools authorities use to analyze genetic material. Handling nitrile safety wear is second nature to him, granting him a profound comprehension of biological cross-contamination, material decay, and police evidence gathering. An expert educator in this field naturally realizes that latex and synthetic hand coverings frequently fail, easily developing microscopic rips or pooling with perspiration during intense physical exertion. Possessing this specific vulnerability knowledge would certainly prompt a savvy offender to discard those compromised items miles away from the actual incident location. Security footage captured an intruder sporting hand protection alongside an inexpensive outdoor rucksack exclusively distributed by the retail giant Walmart. Every single one of those bags carries a highly unique inventory tracking code, the VACE. This essentially means that if a credit card or mobile device pinged inside the shop during checkout, corporate ledgers would hold a permanent digital footprint. Therefore, the equipment functions as far more than mere camouflage. It acts as a breadcrumb trail, while the timeline of events introduces an entirely new level of suspicion. The matriarch vanished precisely when her other child, Savannah, boarded a flight abroad to broadcast the cold weather athletic games for a major television network. Such high-profile media deployments are locked in stone many months prior to departure, a predator waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike while the daughter was airborne. Preoccupied and totally cut off from communication would undoubtedly exploit this exact time frame. Opportunistic drifters simply do not possess that kind of intimate itinerary data, whereas a trusted confidant certainly would. Suspicions deepened in the spring of 2025 when Tommaso legally transferred total control of his real estate and banking assets straight to Annie. Media personality Ashley Banfield eventually broke the news that a police insider admitted detectives viewed the boyfriend as their #1 target during the initial hunt. Although local brass officially rejected this assertion on television, federal agents continuously swarmed the couple's residence on several separate occasions. They hauled away countless sealed packages of potential clues. Technicians tore apart their waste plumbing and practically dismantled their car, all while Tommaso maintained a chilling silence for weeks as the rest of the relatives pleaded on camera, finally showing his face at a remembrance gathering on the 2nd of March. Internet sleuths immediately started matching his physical stature and gait against the shadowy figure from the doorbell video. Pictured next to the 5'10" Savannah, his vertical proportions looked virtually identical to hers. Despite this visual evidence, authorities have never verified his actual measurements, leading to a spin-off hypothesis surrounding his long-term musical partner, Dominic Evans. This alternative suspect measures up at about 5 feet 9 inches tall and sports a beard that perfectly aligns with the federal profiler sketch. Whispers also suggest he bears a distinct scar or tattoo on his lower arm that mirrors a blurry artifact caught on the nighttime camera feed, adding fuel to the fire. The man boasts a hefty rap sheet stacked with prior guilty pleas for home invasion, mugging, stealing, and corporate fraud. The two men have jammed out as a musical duo for 19 straight years. Originally connecting via a local newspaper listing, they have subsequently burned through thousands of hours locked in practice spaces and gigging at local venues. This particular angle proposes a deadly division of labor, where an architect sketches out the victim's daily habits and property blueprints. Meanwhile, the hired muscle handles the dirty work on the ground, allowing the mastermind to remain safely hidden with an ironclad alibi while the hitman strikes. During an interview with the press, the musician claimed he only crossed paths with the victim once back in 2011, adding that detectives barely grilled him for 40 minutes before walking away. Yet, law enforcement has conspicuously refused to label him innocent, which naturally feeds right into a third distinct possibility, focusing heavily on the eldest child, Nancy Guthrie. She was undeniably present at that fateful family meal on the 31st of January. Rumors swirl with wildly contradictory stories regarding who actually chauffeured her mother back. And while the top cop insists Tommaso took the wheel, lingering whispers continuously drag the daughter back into the spotlight. The perfect alibi was sitting right under the same roof, wrapped up in a woman named Annie. Detectives weren't buying it, practically ripping her vehicle apart and holding it hostage for 40 long days. She is the undeniable bridge connecting Tommaso straight to Nancy's front door. By tapping into that mother-daughter dynamic, he gained access to highly sensitive intel that cops now view as critical. He knew her blind spots, the removed hearing aids, the exact daily pill schedule, and crucially, that absolutely nobody would drop by until late the following morning. There is another angle here, pointing the finger away from blood relatives, but still keeping the focus on her immediate orbit. Former federal profilers Jim Clemente and Maureen O'Connell strongly suspect financial predators, noting that anyone crossing her threshold was a major threat. This suspect pool includes the neighborhood handymen, package couriers, lawn care crews, or even a random rideshare driver. Any one of these individuals could have easily clocked that this wealthy older woman was living out there completely isolated. Crime scene expert Joseph Scott Morgan points out that most attacks on seniors are driven by sheer greed. Her high-profile family connections practically painted a giant target on her back, though this hypothesis definitely has some massive holes. A random service worker wouldn't casually hang out inside a stranger's house for 41 minutes. They also wouldn't navigate the property with the chillingly confident swagger captured on that surveillance tape. Former law enforcement officer Eric Maldonado floats a totally different scenario, suggesting a routine break-in violently spiraled out of control. In his mind, a thief crept onto the estate, assuming the elderly homeowner was out cold. She caught him red-handed, leading to a brutal struggle on the patio before he hauled her away to cover his tracks. Maldonado firmly believes the victim's own body is the missing puzzle piece, heavily covered in the killer's genetic material. Yet a common thief doesn't stalk a property for 3 straight weeks or perfectly sabotage specific security feeds. Add in the bizarre amount of time spent loitering indoors, and you quickly realize every single hypothesis falls frustratingly short of a complete picture. The most terrifyingly plausible explanations always circle right back to the victim's inner circle. Only someone intimately familiar with her life could explain the completely ignored pillboxes. It perfectly answers how the alarms were bypassed, why the locks weren't smashed, and why 14 hours slipped by in absolute silence. Compounding the tragedy, local police severely botched the initial response by clearing the scene in less than 20 hours, letting a parade of strangers trample through the yard. Leading crime scene investigators were absolutely horrified, warning that vital clues had likely been destroyed forever. Authorities refused to throw in the towel, setting up a specialized federal squad in Tucson to scour phone pings, genetic swabs, and cyber trails. Investigators are holding out major hope for advanced genetic genealogy, this exact same breakthrough science, the kind used to nail notorious serial killers, might be the silver bullet needed to name the phantom in her living room. Savannah has bravely admitted her mother is likely dead, yet she refuses to stop hunting until those remains are brought home. A staggering bounty of $1 million is currently sitting on the table for anyone brave enough to finally talk. Everything hinges on a massive 4-hour black hole stretching from 9:50 at night until 1:47 in the morning. That was the terrifying window where an elderly woman pulled in, took out her earpieces, and was swallowed by the shadows, leaving nothing but a mechanical garage door as the sole witness. The horrifying truth is hiding somewhere in that dark timeline, locked away in forensic labs and frozen hard drives. All the physical clues tied to seized cars and tracked smartphones are safely preserved for future breakthroughs. They are ticking time bombs, patiently waiting for the exact right moment to expose the monster who pulled this off. This heartbreaking case is more than a mystery. It's a powerful reminder of how fragile safety can be, especially for those living alone. Nancy Guthrie's story exposes a quiet truth. Many people overlook danger doesn't always come from strangers in the dark. Sometimes, it grows from familiarity, routine, and the small details we ignore every day. Her life was built on strength, independence, and resilience. Yet, even the strongest individuals can become vulnerable without proper protection. A silent home, disconnected security systems, and predictable habits can unintentionally create opportunities for harm. This isn't about fear, it's about awareness. We must learn to protect not only ourselves, but also those we love. Check in on elderly family members. Ensure their safety systems actually work. Encourage habits that reduce isolation and increase visibility. And most importantly, never assume it won't happen here. Nancy's story urges us to stay alert, to value preparation over comfort, and to recognize that prevention often lies in the smallest actions. Because sometimes, the difference between safety and tragedy is not luck. It's awareness, attention, and care.